Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Richard Morchoe, and this is the Long Hill Report. With us today, as usual, is Gus Steeves.
Hello, how are you all?
We are going to, with you, discuss some of the issues of the day. And I'll let you, I know I mentioned I had stuff to talk about, but I'll let you start.
Actually, you can start. Go ahead.
All right, well, I have three events in the world that, well, we should think about. One is the fellow in a Wall Street Journal reporter who's been accused by the Russians of being a spy. And there has been a lot of denials, and everybody calling for him to be released, and the Russians aren't budging. But I read something that he was caught at this, or arrested, because he was in the town where they make the most tanks in the world, I believe.
Could be. I mean, something like that, yeah.
I forget which one.
I mean, that in itself doesn't necessarily mean anything,
Well, what he was doing was he was asking questions that, maybe a spy, maybe a reporter would ask, but quite possibly a spy would ask.
And I think it was totally disingenuous when the U.S. government immediately came out and said, oh, he can't possibly be a spy. And then other people have argued, well, it would be totally illegal against U.S. law for them to be using journalists as spies. Come on. I mean, the CIA and our intelligence agencies don't really care too much about U.S. law or any other law.
No, well, they do whatever they can. They did cite that law, but I don't know if you ever heard of Mandy Rice Davies.
I recognize the name, yes.
All right, she was in the famous Profumo scandal.
Okay.
Probably maybe even before you were born. I don't know your age, but anyway.
1971.
What?
1971.
Yeah, you were born then. And so Mandy Rice Davies was another, I guess the term would have been call girl or something. There's another term that I, being the gentleman I am, will not use. There's a few other terms.
Yes.
But
a consort. Let's go that way.
Okay. So anyway, she gave testimony or something about an Englishman, probably 2 steps up on the university scale. I don't think she went to university. She was a Welsh girl who had the Welsh accent, and he denied it. So the press in some interview said to her, well, he's denied it. He said he didn't do that. And she said, in her accent, well, he would say that way. So,
of course they would.
Anything that would say, you would expect a spy agent to say.
Of course. I mean, they're not going to immediately say, oh, yeah, sure, he did it. We'll execute him for you.
Yeah.
The immediate denial is by definition spy trade. That's what they do.
So it could be pure as the driven snow. But there is a possibility it's pure as a driven slush.
It could be. I mean, he could just be a bad reporter and really dumb.
I read another thing about him, that he was an average reporter.
Yeah.
He was nothing special. But how many reporters, Gus, reach the level you and I do? Well, you can laugh about your own. I take my work seriously, but I take mine
seriously too. But I don't care about going to Wall Street Journal or the Times or the Boston Globe either. I mean, I'd much rather just live my life, not have to chase the buck and not have to chase the stupidity. So I've never had any interest in living like in the middle of New York or someplace like that. I just don't. Never had.
Well, we're glad to know you're a homeboy. That's all. We're happy about that.
Well, it's also partially because I spent some time in Phoenix, right in the red light district, and that was enough.
Well, I heard a very interesting fact by a Worcester DJ or morning person or something. Phoenix supposedly grows a wheat in that hot climate that the Italians are importing because it's the best wheat for pizza. But that has nothing to do with
I
anything.
can't say I've ever heard that.
Well, see what you missed out if it's true.
I mean, when I was down there, they were more famous for growing lots of rocks and oranges and some bad lemons and cactuses, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. And
they're not growing much of those anymore because they're running out of water. So they'll be probably coming our way soon.
that's probably, yeah, the water situation out west is not good.
No.
So another issue that has come up is the Russians. They're absolutely collapsing. Everything's wrong from the American press. The Russians are really, really in bad shape.
Mm-hmm.
But
Sounds like projection to me.
well, it's probably projection. But they cut oil production.
Yep.
And of course, we were going to ruin their oil production anyway. If wasn't that a few months ago or a year ago, something that we were the ruble was going to be rubble and all that.
Well, where they set this ridiculously low maximum price for their oil and
which
gas,
everybody respected.
which everybody ignored.
Yeah.
And ironically, the one country that was willing to pay their rates, I think was something, I saw something about Japan doing it, and the U.S. government said, okay, fine, we'll just let you do it.
Yeah.
So in other words, it's a joke. The problem is that all of the sanctions have been a joke.
So
they do nothing except hurt our own allies.
But what is interesting is that OPEC, or a number of OPEC companies, immediately went along with it.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
And these are countries that we've supposedly had some oil influence on.
Now, we did it one time, yeah.
Well, the reason why we went over to Saudi after we closed the gold window in 1971.
Yep. Well, actually, we were there back in the 1950s.
But we were basically saying to them, look, we're done with the gold, but what we're going to use to back this is your oil.
Yeah.
And nobody can trade in anything but dollars for oil.
Right.
And everybody went along with that. People are not going along with it. OPEC countries that we also had other OPEC countries we had influence. They went along with Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a crisis? Is it not a crisis? I don't know, but it's just something that's happened that didn't happen.
I wouldn't say it's a crisis. I think it's just kind of a logical progression of the way things are going.
Crises can happen in slow motion.
Oh, they can. That's true. But even then, sometimes logical progressions turn into crisis when you aren't prepared for them, when you're not willing to accept that the world changes around you, and that I think we've gotten to a point where our foreign policy has so alienated so much of the world. I saw a map a couple of days ago showing something. It was colored. I can't remember who posted it, but it was specifically colored to show which countries were supporting our side in the war in Ukraine and which ones were not, and the vast majority were not in most of the world. And that's not a surprise.
No,
I mean, we have managed to alienate so much of the world that we keep talking about how Russia is a pariah and isolated, and we're going to turn around and find we're talking to ourselves.
Yes.
In a very near future, in a cave, rambling like everybody else thinks we're idiots.
Well,
because we are.
Well, France
our government is anyway.
France is holding on, and at least ostensibly, in Germany, holding on with us. Poland.
The people are opposing it, though.
Oh, that's true. But
Yeah.
Poland is hanging on with Russia against Russia with us because, well, it takes 5 minutes of history to figure out why that was possibly true.
Right. It takes 5 minutes of history that our government never bothers to read.
Right. Well, they did during the Cold War.
And I think they've forgot it all since then.
The Baltics are hanging with us,
Yeah.
desperately so, because they do fear Russia, and understandably so. Finland,
They just joined NATO
well, see, this is the thing.
within the last week.
I don't know if I think I've told you about neutrality studies.
Yeah.
And Pierre Lotaz has written about this. And the cornerstones were the two countries that got Russia out. And actually one of them got us out as well with their own efforts.
Out of what?
Out of their country.
Oh, okay.
And Finland got them out
Yeah.
after the war. Had
Sure.
they lost what they lost, and Austria got us and Russia out of their country. So it could be done, and it worked really well for Finland.
Mhm.
And
Did
they
very
don't,
much.
they probably don't want to, they'd rather not be beholden to Russia.
Well,
I mean, to
considering
us.
They'd
to
rather not
Russia.
be beholden to the Russians either, because I mean they have a history for like a century of being Russian colony,
Yeah,
Russian
and
provinces.
they wouldn't want it.
Yeah, I can understand why they wouldn't.
But this might have been not a great gamble, because I think our influence in Europe is gonna kind of crash.
It looks like it's heading that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's getting to the point where the populace in many of those countries is getting ticked off enough. I mean, hell, there's actually been publicity about some of the protesters in France not only calling to get rid of Macron, but actually talking for revolution.
Well,
You start seeing actual violence in the streets, there would be a problem. Because then you had a situation where a significant number, probably of their police and military, would probably support the protesters.
well, the
in
fire,
some of those countries.
the fire went with them,
Yeah.
went with the people.
Yeah.
Is that a start? Now, this is, police are a funny thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually was up at the New Braintree, what do you call it?
The state police
place
training
where-
barracks?
state police training
Yeah.
place. And I was at a training session where they were training to work with the mob.
Right.
And their training is probably good.
Mhm.
But police in a revolution disappear pretty quickly.
True.
And people in this country don't realize that. I have a good relationship with the police in my town. I
Yeah.
don't want to have an adversarial relationship with anybody.
Yeah, I never had a problem with mine.
And you'll see not in my town, but in other towns, back the blue, we support our police.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that. I mean, what are you thinking? Do you think these, they're nice? They might come when your cat gets caught in the tree, they might come and help you out. But if there were a real turnaround, I don't know. I don't see it happening.
Not in our country, not
Yeah.
anytime soon.
Not in this area.
I mean,
It's already kind of happened in some cities.
This is true. This is true. We are starting to see some issues, and I think in the maybe moderate term, I can see development in our country that leads toward potentially more secessionist activity in various parts of the country. I don't know if our area would be one of them, but there already are things like secessionist groups in many places. Like, for example, there actually is one in Vermont. There's groups in
Where are they
Western-
going? Where's Vermont going?
Well, they just based their idea on the fact that Vermont was briefly its own republic back in the 1770s or whenever
It was.
and some of these other organizations basically make the same kind of claims, whether they're true or not. But it doesn't really make a difference. I think the argument is just, it kind of ties into the whole sense of, I think a lot of people in our country are really tired of the blatant corruption in D.C. and recognize that both D.C. and in many cases the state governments are not listening to the average American people anymore. They haven't been for some time.
Well, let's think about government a little. I mean, I don't want to develop a treatise here, but our government is not a democracy. It's a managerial state, as Orwell talked. Orwell wrote a review of Burnham's The Managerial State, and he based a lot of 1984 on it.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And the state business, business not so much, because but the really mega corporations, the defense, what they call it, they've advanced military-industrial complex, now
Right.
it's built banking complex, and the bank is really
The concentration power in all of these entities.
So it's not capitalist, it's not socialist. It might have some social democrat aspects, but those are bones thrown to the people.
Mostly, yeah. That's what our government has been good at for a long time now is throwing little bits and pieces of popcorn to us, while putting the rest of the whole truckload of the food to the rich.
Well, yeah. I mean, look at who's done best out of this war. It's certainly Raytheon and Lockheed, just refilling the things.
The various investors that are in them. Yeah.
One could. My basic theory is everything eventually concentrates. So you start off with a small government. You can't stop it from eventually metastasizing into just big.
Well, not necessarily. I think it depends on a lot of factors. I think one of the primary factors that enabled our government to metastasize is the fact that it was founded on a continent that had so much space to play with, that it was almost built to be a frontier state, because it was. And we still have the attitude of a frontier state. But the problem is that it's become, we are currently running into situations that do not work with a frontier mentality anymore. This is actually an argument that comes from William Catton.
From who?
William Catton. It's he wrote a book years and years ago. Thank you. Overshoot. I drew a blank on the name of the title, the name of the book. Overshoot from 1980. And he uses an argument basically that ties in what we're seeing politically, economically, socially, and obviously it was slightly to a lesser degree back in 1980 than it is now, I think, but it's still the same issues, to an ecological basis, which is that essentially that we saw a lot of the expansion in both economics and population and a variety of other things, food production, all kinds of other things, because of the fact that Europe, the people in Europe, where they were already overcrowded in Europe specifically and other parts of Eurasia in general, were able to export a bunch of their population to the Western Hemisphere. And the technological disparities and diseases obviously wiped out the population here to a large degree. So it was more or less virgin territory from their point of view. So they were able to take it over and take advantage of the resources that were greatly diminished in Eurasia at the time. And that allowed for a whole bunch of expansion, and that the US's development specifically is because of that. And that we are now running, even more than back in 1980 when he was writing, civilization and the US specifically are running into the wall because of the fact that we are getting close to the peak of our ability to grow. And we have a system that is based and depends on consistent growth. So we have a problem. And we have to change our system to be what would be ecologically called what's the word I want? It's the next stage in succession in ecology, from a frontier community to a more stable climax community. That's what they call a climax community, where it's stable and working and cooperating with the other communities around it and so forth.
Well,
we're going through serious growing pains to do that, and we'll see if we do.
That may be true, but that doesn't diminish the fact that governmental, the whole complex is just burgeoning and growing and growing and growing and growing, and excessively.
It is at this point, yes.
And we could make it a paradise out in the wilderness, or we could just pollute it completely. And
we seem to be going in the latter direction, unfortunately.
Well, anyway, that still doesn't take away the fact that the government is just growing and growing and making a mess. you know when the Federal Reserve did start.
1913.
It was a conference of people, big bankers,
Yeah.
and it's owned by the banks. It's not a.
I know it is.
Yeah,
I know
and
that.
so that gets power and gets power and
Of course
gets
it does.
power and gets power, and it accretes power and makes a mess of things. Military accretes power, but it's just getting bigger, and
I'm
growth
not
is
disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's part of the problem.
So
That is I think that is a symptom of what William Catton is talking about. The
But
underlying issue is they're all the same issue.
It
They're all
may be
connected.
It may be a system,
Yeah.
but it may be a symptom, but
Yeah.
but it would happen anyway because growth just happens no matter what. I mean, a government will live to grow. Bureaucracies live for, you start the bureaucracy to give little children candy or something, and it will never be abolished. It will be this billion-dollar operation with thousands of outlets all over, and you won't be able to get rid of it. And any one of them is going to be that way. And it's not because, it may not be because the people who are doing it are malevolent, but once the bureaucracy starts, the bureaucracy will take care of itself, will want to grow. Any government, any place, Rome, Britain, France, it happens. It just, yeah.
I think that the issue, I think there's a lot of truth to that. However, I would like to point out that metastasism is not unique to government. It exists for any. I think it exists for any organizational system that is predicated on growth. Our governments are predicated on growth. And so are the corporations, so are the NGOs, so are many of the other various entities that we...
The mega groups cannot pull that stunt unless they're part of they're part of the managerial state. Now, if you don't...
Not necessarily. Some of them do it fairly well without it. And they certainly benefit from that.
Name one that doesn't do it, the really huge, humongous things without being part of the government. Look at just this recent pandemic. Pfizer and Moderna couldn't have done that unless the government gave them the blessing.
I'm not disagreeing with that. The catch-22, though, is that you're asking me to prove a negative. Because we live in a system...
What did you assert, though?
Let me finish. The problem is that we live in a system where that's all we see.
Where do
it's
we
like
don't
living
see?
in water.
Where do we not see? You say it doesn't happen. There's places without the government happen. I want to know where it doesn't happen without the government blessing.
I didn't say that.
What did you say? Please.
I said that organizations that are built on growth will tend to do that.
Name one that's not working with the government is my.
I didn't say that they were or weren't working. I just said that that system will happen when you're based on growth, because it's designed to do that. Almost by definition, you have a system where we see it in our capitalist system, we see it in our governments because they're intertwined.
We do not have a capitalist system. We do not have.
If it's called capitalism, we should treat it as capitalism.
It's not capitalism.
It is.
It's managerial.
It's still the same thing.
No, it's.
If the people running the
It's
show
not a
certainly
market.
think it is capitalism.
It's not a real market system.
It's a market system. It's just not what you call a free market system.
It cannot be a market system.
It is a market system.
If
you are exchanging products, it's a market by definition. It is not a quote free market system. There never has been one.
There have.
No, there haven't. Where? Where?
Well, Greece.
Where? When?
Ancient Greece, early on, in early Athens. It was there. They were the difference between them and Sparta.
I would seriously doubt that that the government in Athens was not actually having a say. Even Adam Smith admits that there have almost never been governments that did not control some aspect of their markets.
Well, I would agree with that true.
Therefore, it's not a free market.
But there are some.
It is controlled in some way. The markets are always dependent on the government running the system. Always.
The government...
This depends on who the government is that changes
If I can bring that. All right. Government has always had to be there, as far as we know, to prevent bellum omnis contra omnium, the war of all against all. That's government's basic function.
Theoretically, but I don't know if that necessarily would be true. But theoretically, that's the argument.
Some governments have been, to a lesser extent, not in the market, not interfering in the market. Now, Adam Smith was speaking in a country that basically had its own privately owned Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
The Bank of England was only nationalized, and not really completely nationalized, until after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
But, okay, if there's you can say there's absolutely never been an absolutely pure system, but the best system is one that does not have the government choosing sides and favoring one group over another.
In theory, that would be great. It's never happened.
Well, we've got to.
So how would we see it?
Well, in theory, socialism would be great, but it's never happened.
I'm not disagreeing with that either.
So,
except maybe in a tribal system. But either way, I mean, I think the argument that we are not free market is certainly true because it can't exist.
But some governments... It
would be great if it did, but it doesn't.
What I prefer to use the managerial system is because I'll go back to that word, metastasizes.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that.
Now, the world is better if with a relatively smaller free market.
Okay.
I mean, a relatively smaller hand of the government on the market.
I think it would be flipped around, that I think the world would be a much better state with a much smaller market.
And a bigger government.
And smaller hands and smaller governments involved.
So when you say small market, develop that a little.
Well, I mean, I think that we look at it from, if you look at it from an ecological point of view, a lot of the issues that we are seeing are because of overarching consumption issues, of energy, of resources, of a whole slew of other issues that all generally tie back to the ability of our current market system to produce and extract, more importantly, extract stuff and market it to everybody whether we need it or not. It's very good at that. Okay, I would argue that our current society, and the US specifically, is probably the most overly propagandized society that's ever existed in so many different ways. I mean, when
you say propaganda,
I'm going to get to that. When I mean propaganda, I mean not only do we see a lot of political manipulation, we also see crass amounts of blatant advertising, and they are really the same thing, especially in a system where, as you point out, it's basically a corporatist managerial state where there is so much intertwining power between those who are nominally government and those who are nominally corporate, and you really can't tell the difference.
I'm not going to argue that you're wrong, but give me an example of the propagandization.
Just look at television every day, all of the sheer quantity of ads we see for everything. And so often it's so blatant, they're in the programming. You've got people who are nominally on news shows, but they don't bother to tell you that they're actually arguing in favor of their sponsor, who happens to be a defense contractor, and they're interviewing a general who they don't actually say that this person's from DynCorp, for example.
So this is basically where the great managerial thing exists.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Now, this is why I believe the state has, part of why I think it's going to go through a crisis that is probably going to be, and we're getting late on here, so I'm not going to go into it. It may be existential.
I would agree with you. That I agree with. I think we have generally agree on where things are headed, but not necessarily on the causes. you seem to see one side of it, I see the other side of it, but they're intertwined.
Well, I would have to say
separate the two either.
I would have to say I see the two of them intertwined.
I do too.
Which is why I call it the managerial,
Yeah, I get that.
state.
I get that.
And we have hit 30 minutes
Yes,
of
we have.
nonstop singing and dancing. Where I got that from was, I don't know if you've ever read the first Solzhenitsyn's First Circle.
Oh, actually, I haven't.
He asked the doctor in the cancer clinic, I think it was in the cancer clinic, he had been an inmate so he was wondering if the doctor had been a doctor at a gulag.
Right, yeah.
And his way of asking was, were you ever in a place of nonstop singing and dancing? So, if you come back next month, we hope to do it on the regular Thursday. We will have nonstop singing and dancing. This has been the Long Hill Report with Mike and Gus.
Have a great day.